Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to a brand new video where I'm going to be sharing all the things I wish I had known before I had started sewing. For those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Madison. I am a high school fashion design teacher by day, and in my free time I love to film YouTube videos to share my love and passion for fashion with you all. I share a lot of sewing tutorials and my adventures and creative endeavors, but I also share educational videos on fashion and sewing related topics, kind of like today's video. You might notice that we are in a bit of a different location today, and as much as I love filming in my studio, it is way too hot to sit out there and film, especially just to sit out there in a talking video. Texas is very hot and my studio is in our garage, so it does not have air conditioning, and I did not want to melt in the process of filming this video, so we are inside in air conditioning to talk about all the things I wish I had known before I had started sewing. And what I love about this video is that it's a video I really never thought about making, or a topic that I had ever really thought about discussing in a video until someone suggested it in the comments on one of my latest videos, and I thought it was such a good idea that I decided it was going to be my next video here on my channel. Plus, I have started a brand new school year, so I am back in the classroom with students teaching fashion design and interpersonal studies, which is so fun. But that means that my schedule is quite busy again, and I do not have nearly as much time to sew, which is so sad. And that is one downside of summer coming to an end. And to make this video a little bit different and more exciting, I decided that I didn't just want to share my own experience with things I wish I had known before I had started sewing, but I wanted to share the expertise and the voices of all of you here on YouTube. So I posted a message in my community page here on YouTube asking for your feedback about the things you wish you had known before you started sewing, and I got so many responses from all of you, and so we are going to include all of those in today's video. So today's video isn't just my experience and me sitting up here talking, but it is largely a collaborative effort thanks to all of you to share your own experience and your stories. So let's dive into all of the things I wished I had known before I had started sewing. So I made a list on my phone of some of the things I wanted to cover in today's video, so we'll go through this and then we'll get to all of the things that a lot of you suggested and submitted to me. So number one on my list, the things I had wished I had known before I had started sewing or in the process of starting my sewing journey, is that you do not have to be an expert, and all you have to do is be willing to learn. I think there's this whole idea kind of in the sewing realm, but really mainly in the area of being a fashion designer. Obviously I'm not a fashion designer, but I love to make my own clothes. And for a lot of people who are pursuing that, they have this idea that they have to be an expert, that they have to have taken classes in it, that they have to go to school and study it. And that just is not the case. In today's day and age, if you are willing to learn, there are so many resources available out there for you. And so that is something that kind of I wish I had known at the beginning, not because I think it would have changed anything, except for it might have changed my perspective and outlook. That I didn't have to be perfect at it, that I didn't have to be an expert at the beginning, because no one is, but that I just had to be willing to learn. And that's a lesson that I've kind of learned over the years, is that I can learn along the way. It's okay if I'm doing a project where one of the steps is something I've never done before and I'm not familiar with, because I can stop, look up a YouTube video and figure it out in the middle of that project. Second thing I wish I had known is that store-bought pattern sizing is different from clothing sizing. And I partially knew that, but I have learned a lot more about it now as a fashion design teacher teaching it, is that the patterns you buy at the store to make clothes are based on kind of the old standard sizing system, and sizing has changed a lot over the years. And so when I'm sewing, I actually sew in a larger size than I wear and buy in real life, and even though I sew on that size, I always have to make a lot of tweaks, and so the garment I make ends up being like 3 different sizes in 3 different areas because bodies aren't proportional. And so I kind of wish that I had known that, because I feel like it would have saved me time along the way, but here we are 25 years down the road, and we've kind of figured that out and we've been able to work with it. So that's definitely a tip, is that store-bought pattern sizing is a whole lot different than actual clothing. The third thing on my list is that you do not have to spend a fortune on fabric. I definitely bought a lot of store-bought fabric when I was starting a lot of my projects. Back then, when I thrifted, I just thrifted clothes. I never thought about thrifting pieces for fabric. And so I used to buy a lot of fabric from the Walmart dollar section because they used to have a bomb dollar fabric section. And so I bought a lot of fabric from that over the years when I was younger and first starting off. But then as I got into more like technical projects or were looking for a certain fabric, I definitely shopped at like Hobby Lobby and Joann's, and I would spend a lot of money on fabric where by the time I made that garment for myself, I could have just bought it at the store. Back then I didn't really have the perspective of being a conscientious consumer in regards to not buying things from fast fashion brands, which is another thing I've learned over the years, but that you don't have to spend a fortune on fabric. And I'm so glad that I love to sew out of sheets now, because it literally saves me so much. Even though I spend lots of money on sheets because I buy them like every time I go to Goodwill, you don't have to spend a fortune on fabric. And if you're even making just a super fancy outfit, like I loved historical fashion, I always thought that I had to go and buy that fabric at the store, and again, you can thrift a lot of that fabric. The next thing I wish I had known is that there are different stitches and stitch tensions and different threads that can be used for different fabrics. And this is something that you have to do some research on or just learn by trial and error. There was a lot of trial and error back in my day of learning how to sew, especially when I was using different kinds of fabrics. I would get really frustrated because my machine would come unthreaded, or things would snag because I wasn't using the right needle, or my stitches would be super weird because I wasn't using the right tension. And so learning that along the years, and I'm still learning, I'm still not an expert on that, definitely helps you when you're working with different kinds of fabric, trying to understand your machine. Being an expert sewer is understanding how everything works together and all the technical things that go into your machine sewing with the thread on the fabric. The fifth thing I wish I had learned, and I learned this not even when I was in college, I literally learned it my first year teaching fashion design. So my students do this seam packet where they have to do hems, different seam finishes, gathers, etc. And I was looking at videos to show them at examples, and I was looking up a video for gathering. Never knew until like 2 years ago that the best way to gather is to sew 2 parallel basting stitches and then pull the tails at the same time, and it creates a more structured and stable gather. Mind blown. It's changed my life since then, doing a double row gather. If you don't do that, you need to. It will change your life. The other thing I really wish I had known about was the kind of speed control sewing machines, which when I was first starting to sew, I don't think speed control sewing machines were really... My cat is coming into the room to join the party. I don't think speed control sewing machines were really a thing, and I didn't know about them until I started sewing, and our sewing lab has speed control machines. So I really like that because it allows you to adjust the speed if you are comfortable or not, all that stuff. So speed control machines are really great if you are just getting into sewing, because you can put your machine at a slower speed and sew on a slower speed until you get more comfortable, and then when you get more comfortable you can just do full speed ahead, and it's awesome. Although now in our sewing lab at school we have Juki sewing machines which literally sew 100 miles an hour, and I'm obsessed with them. They're just way too cool. The other thing I wish I had known about was automatic buttonholes. And again, I didn't have a super fancy sewing machine, so my sewing machine didn't actually make automatic buttonholes. I'm pretty sure it's only the sewing machines that have like computerized parts on the inside, which my new machine does now. And they're awesome because you insert the button into the back of the buttonhole foot, and then you put your stitch on the right stitch number for the buttonhole style that you want, and your machine calculates everything, and then you just put it on your fabric and press the presser foot, and it sews the buttonhole to the exact size you need for that size of the button. And it's amazing. Like, buttonholes are like a no-brainer thanks to that super cool tool. The other thing I wish I had known, and again, I learned this by trial and error, and it was when I was first starting to sew, and I kind of just wanted to do my own thing, which meant I made a lot of mistakes along the way. When I was growing up, I loved to dress up in dress-up clothes and like play 1800s, 1700s, whatever. A lot of make-believe, and so we wore I wore dress up clothes a lot, and so I wanted to make like all of these different skirts for my dress up wardrobe. And for the longest time I thought that you made a skirt, like if you think about a skirt and you have like the skirt shape, I thought you just needed one of those to make a skirt. And so for an entire week I was trying to figure out why I couldn't make this skirt, because I had the skirt piece but it wouldn't go around my body. And I'm pretty sure I made a skirt like piecing together other pieces to like close the skirt together, not even thinking that you need actually 2 skirt pieces. But we figured that out, and now we are pro at making skirts because we understand we have to have 2 skirt pieces. The other thing I wish I had known, and I feel like this is something you learn along the way, and it's very much my outlook on life, is that you have to sometimes make mistakes to learn and to grow as a person. And I tell that to my students all of the time. One of my favorite quotes is a Miss Frizzle quote, which says, "Take chances, make mistakes, and get messy." And that's definitely a common theme in sewing, is that you have to make mistakes to learn. And I wish I had known that at the onslaught, because I think I wouldn't have gotten as frustrated on sewing projects that didn't always go according to plan. The other thing I wish I had known is that you didn't have to have a serger to do seam finishes. I didn't know about all of the different seam finishes until I took one of my sewing classes in college for my degree, and we had to make this packet of all of these different seam samples, and I learned all the different seam finishes, like flat felled, French seam, bound, Hong Kong, zigzagged, pinked and sheared, all of those. I always thought that a serger was the only way to finish the raw edges of seams, and if I had known there were other options, I would have had a lot of nice and finished seams on the inside of my garments when I was making them growing up. Alright, so I think that is about it for all of the things I could think about that I wish I had known before I had started sewing. And so we're going to hop on over to YouTube to all of the amazing feedback that I got from you all on YouTube that are sewers, the things you wish you had known, because there are some really great things that I didn't even think about or that didn't even come to my mind. And so it was great kind of hearing some advice from your own experiences. So we're gonna go through these, and I'm gonna share people's names and the advice that they gave. Some people have similar advice where they shared the same thing, so I might skip over some of those, but I want to share a lot of these because they were really, really great. So Tiana shared this, which I love it. It's such great advice. She says, "Don't sew when you're tired or frustrated. You'll start making crazy mistakes. Also, it's okay to put a project down and come back to it later." When I started, I was so insistent on doing one project at a time and completing that one before moving to another one, which would lead me to sewing while tired or frustrated. So that is some great nuggets of wisdom there. Leah shared this. She said that failure is okay and essential for learning. Someone after my own heart. In my early days, when I failed at a project, it set me backward, and it would take me a while to start over again. Over years of mistakes and seam ripping, which still happens quite often, I've learned to embrace and the fails and learn from them. So great. Gessa Marie shared this. She said, "The biggest learning curve was definitely to learn about patterns. In the beginning, I used store-bought patterns. The problem is that my shoulders and waist have totally different sizes, so I always got frustrated because nothing fit the way it was supposed to." I know the struggle. I feel the struggle, and I live the struggle. Tracing patterns from your own clothing is sometimes the way to go, or if I'm using a store-bought pattern, merging the sizes together. Great, great tip. Maha and Sarah said, "When making your own patterns and designs, start roughly knowing what you want, and if there are mistakes along the way, see if you can integrate them to make an even more interesting design." Love it. Use mistakes to your advantage. Angie gave this great piece of advice for what she wished she had known. "It doesn't have to be expensive. When I first started out, I was buying high-end fabric, but I have found that thrift stores, garage sales even, and Walmart are great sources of fabric." 'Tis true. Nava shared this. "I wish I knew that seam finishes are truly no big deal for most of my casual clothes. I made linen shorts, and after 2 summers with unfinished seams, they've held up fine, much less intimidating to beginners." So yes, if you are a beginner, you do not have to finish your seams. You can totally leave them raw. finishing your seams definitely adds on more time. And like I said, there are so many different types of seam finishes, and if you don't have a serger, I feel like sometimes the seam finishes are a little bit more difficult. So it is completely fine to have raw edges on the inside of your garments unless that bugs you or annoys you while you're wearing it. But if you don't know anything about seam finishes, I would highly encourage you to go learn about them, because it's just a great tool to have in your arsenal of knowledge. Naomi shared this. She said, I wish I had known how important ironing is for woven fabrics and some knits too. I also wish I'd known about measurements and grading. Also making sure the fabric is right for the project. A lot of things I tried to make didn't fit me, and I was stumped because I didn't know that the patterns weren't made to my ready-to-wear size. Yes, this is what I'm saying. Your ready-to-wear is the size you buy in the store. The patterns you buy at the store to make your clothes, completely different size range. So if that's all you take away from today's video, that's gonna save you so much frustration. She said, I was also 15 when I started sewing my own clothes in earnest, and my mom is a quilter. So though she could teach me how to sew, she could only help me minimally with clothing patterns. I also wish I had someone who could have taught me the right way from the beginning. Great advice. Nava also shared 2 other bits of advice, things she wished she had known. She said, I wish I knew not to bother with patterns for basic beginner garments. Drafting my own basics has been so much more successful than when I tried starting with a pattern, which is so true. Depending on what your learning style is, you might be someone who is a very visual learner, and so actually having the store-bought pattern, reading the directions, seeing the pictures might help you. However, if you are someone who loves to problem solve, trying to figure out and make all of your own patterns is a great place to start, especially if you're a beginner. There's so many amazing YouTube videos out there which show you how to trace your own clothes and make patterns from them, how to draft super basic patterns, and so if you want to figure that out, it will probably an easier bet than having to cut out a pattern you get at the store, because if we're being honest, I hate cutting out the patterns that I buy from the store, which is why I would much rather make my own patterns. She also said, I wish I measured my sewing space to accommodate a bigger ironing board. Sewing involves tons of ironing, so much more than I thought. Now I'm going to rearrange everything for an ironing board upgrade. Love that, and it's so true. Having a big ironing board for bigger projects and a really great iron that is hot and that also has a steam setting is very helpful. Hannah said, entering sewing can be really intimidating when you look at what you wish the outcome to be. It takes a ton of practice and the learning never ends, but to enjoy the process and stick with it is going to get you places. Also, to understand the tension once you move away from cotton will save you a bit of insanity, which is so true. The tension on your machine and adjusting that when you're sewing on other fabrics that aren't cotton, like knits and satins, you have to change the tension, otherwise your seams are going to be really weird. Zafaria said, I wish I knew that the outcome doesn't need to be perfect from the first try. This applies to everything in life, which is true. But if you are a perfectionist, sewing is going to be your nemesis on some days. So allow freedom for mistakes. Or as we say in my school district, we always say failing forward, because failure is not the end of the road. It just means you learn one way that didn't work and you can figure out another way that does. This follower, who goes by the name Leisure Letter on YouTube, shares an incredible bit of advice that I also wish I had known when I had first started sewing, and I didn't learn it until like 5 years ago, and it's like my kryptonite. So anyways, they said that something they wish they had known is that patterns by the Big Five are constantly going on sale. The Big Five are like the main pattern companies, like Simplicity, McCall's are the 2 that I always buy. Bernina is another pattern company, and also Vogue Patterns, but that they're going on sale all the time. It's kind of frustrating to spend 20 bucks on a pattern, then the next week they go on sale, or thinking you missed the sale and having to pay full price, because store-bought patterns are actually really expensive, which can be very frustrating. But if you think about the fact that you're buying a pattern where you can make like 3 to 4 different garments from it, in the long run it pays off. But if you have a Hobby Lobby or Joann Fabrics near you, make sure that you are staying up to date on their sales, because Simplicity and McCall's go on sale either once a month or every other month for 99 cents or like $1.99 at Joann Fabrics and Hobby Lobby. And every time that happens, all of us seamstresses stock up on them, and it's amazing, but it's also horrible because then we run out of space for all of our patterns that we buy. So that's a really great tip. Brittany said, get excited about messing up. I love that mindset. You learn so much by fixing and troubleshooting mistakes, and 99% of the time, you're the only one who knows anything went wrong. which is true. You only have to rip out a seam one time to learn not to do it again. Or, I mean, you're gonna rip out seams all the time. I still rip them out all the time, but you might not have to rip it out in that same like kind of seam, because you know next time not to sew that the wrong way. Grizel said having a lot of patience, but also giving yourself the grace to make mistakes, even when you see the sleeves upside down, which is true. Just rip it out, fix it, and move on. Sandy said if you don't have a dedicated cutting table and cut on the floor, knee pads are an absolute essential, which is so true. Before I had the studio in my garage and had the ping pong table, which is my cutting table, I cut out all of my patterns on the floor. So I would literally be crawling around on the floor all the time. Thankfully in our house we had carpet at that time, so I had some padding for my knees, but if you are working on a really hard surface, definitely would encourage you to use knee pads, because the floor is sometimes the best cutting and sewing place, if we're being honest. Hannah said this: you usually shouldn't buy fabric unless you have a specific idea of something to make with it. Otherwise, you'll just hoard and feel unfulfilled at all the fabric you haven't made projects with. I feel slightly called out on that. Anyways. Nava said, I thought darts were more intimidating than lining. No idea why. Darts are easy, especially for casual blouses and pants, which is so true. Darts do seem very intimidating, but they are literally the easiest thing in the world. If you don't know how to do darts, look up a YouTube video and you'll figure it out and you'll be a pro. Jezreel said this: first you need to understand your machine very well, that your projects will not always turn out the way you had imagined in your head, and working with different kinds of fabric can be a bit tricky, and like me, I begin a project but halfway through I lose track and begin a new project. Have so many unfinished projects and a whole lot of scraps that scream at me to become something beautiful. I feel like all of us who are seamstresses can easily relate to that, but that's also me in books. I'm constantly reading like 3 different books not at the same time, but like I'm reading all of them. It just depends the mood I'm in for that day to read that book. Adriana said this: I wish I knew how to properly use a seam ripper. I thought I had to take each stitch off one at a time. So true. And a lot of my students make this mistake as well. They go and rip out every single seam, like stitch, which you can do, but the easiest way to do it is to kind of open up the fabric so that the seam is right in the middle and exposed. If you pull the fabric, the stitches will even come apart a little bit, and you just take your seam ripper and you just push it all the way down, and it like rips it in one thing. Be careful though, because sometimes it can go off track and then you like rip a hole in your fabric, and then that's just devastating, and you throw the fabric on the ground and walk away until the next day. But it is a much quicker way to rip out your seams, is to rip it where the stitch actually is between the 2 pieces of fabric, and just rip straight rather than ripping every single stitch, because otherwise it literally will take forever. This follower on YouTube said, I wish I had known the importance of pressing, which is so true. Anytime you sew a seam, you always press it open or press it to the side. Anytime you sew a dart, you're always going to want to press it, because it is going to make the garment actually like fit to the sizing that it's supposed to be sewn, and it's also just going to look so much nicer. And also you never want to ever sew with wrinkly fabric. So if you wash it and dry it and it's wrinkly, always press it before you start sewing, so that you don't cut out a shape and then you press it and then it's now a completely different shape. Crystal says she wished she had known how to read patterns, and that is a big learning curve, is learning how to read the actual pattern if you're using store-bought patterns, because there are so many different markings on it to understand what they all mean. So I know there are so many amazing YouTube videos out there that will walk you through that process. So if you are new to sewing, go and figure out how to read a pattern, because then when you go into using a pattern, you are not going to get frustrated, because you're going to understand everything the pattern is telling you to do, where it's telling you to cut your pattern pieces, and you're also not going to cut your pattern pieces wrong, because you're going to pay attention to the grain lines, the cut on fold lines, the notches, all the markings, and it's going to save you so much time and also so many mistakes and all the headaches. We have one last thing that Hannah said she wished she had known before she had started sewing, and she said, it takes so much time. Which is so true, especially when you are first starting out and you are learning how to read a pattern, learning how to sew, learning how to use different techniques. As you're making the project, it's going to take a lot of time. But as you go through the years and you get a lot more confident, like now, these days, if I'm using a store-bought pattern, all I use the store-bought pattern for is for the pattern pieces. I don't even look at the directions, because these days I know the steps that I need to construct a garment in. I know that I'm always going to start with my neckline, that I'm going to do my sleeves, that I'm going to attach my sleeves, that I'm going to sew my side seams, that I'm going to do my hem. So now, because I have sewn for so many years, I understand the process of sewing. I don't even have to look at the directions anymore. But if you are new to sewing, you're definitely going to want to consult the directions until you get confident in understanding everything that goes into a project. And then it's still going to take so much time, because you're probably going to get on more complicated projects, or just have all of these different ideas for all these projects you want to do. At the end of the day, yes, sewing takes a lot of time, but that also means it's plenty of time to listen to all the podcasts, binge all the TV shows, and watch all of the movies, because you can count it as multitasking and being productive instead of just sitting and watching it. So tip. So those are all of the incredible experiences and suggestions from all of you amazing seamstresses here on YouTube who follow me. So thank you for sharing your own experience of the things you wish you had known before you started sewing. I feel like so many of those were things I didn't even think about, but I know I can 100% relate to, or even am still learning about today. So if you are someone who's watching this and you have just started sewing, welcome to the most exciting adventure ever, and the greatest hobby in the world. And if you're watching this and you are wanting to learn how to sew, I hope you take all of those bits of advice and hopefully put those to good use and realize that mistakes are a good thing, that store-bought patterns have different sizes, just all of the great pieces of advice. I feel like it perfectly sums up what it means to be someone who loves to sew, whether you are sewing your own clothes or quilting or just making all different odds and ends and accessories. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It was definitely a little bit different, but it was super fun to share the things that I wish I had known when I reflected back on when I had started sewing, the things I'm still learning about today. But it was also really great to collaborate with all of you to hear your voices and hear your stories and allow you to be part of this video, which was really cool. We should figure out a way to do more videos like this in the future. So if you have an idea, definitely drop it in the comments. If you have something else that has come to mind that you wish you had known before you had started sewing, drop it in the comments so we can all learn from you and get some additional tips. If there was a tip that really stood out to you, or that was your key takeaway from this video, I would love to know what that is. So again, drop that in the comments below. And if you haven't already done so, give this video a thumbs up. And also, if you are not a subscriber to my channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you stay updated on new videos and projects in the future. I am going to try to continue to create content and videos throughout this fall, but I cannot promise that they will be coming out on a consistent schedule, because like I said, our school year has started, and as much as I like to work on videos and sew on the weekends, or even try to do things when I get home from work during the week, I'm usually just so exhausted and have so many other things to do that as much as I love sewing, it's sometimes at the bottom of my list. So I'm going to try to continue working on videos and content to share the things I'm working with all of you. But in the meantime, if you are on TikTok, make sure you go find me and follow me on TikTok. I have the link in the description of this video, because that's actually where I post videos throughout the week when I don't have time to edit a full-blown YouTube video. So I have many sewing tutorials, thrift flips on there. I also share information and educational videos about fashion and sewing. And if you also want to see a peek into my life as a high school family consumer science teacher, I also share a lot of videos on TikTok about my experience teaching fashion design to high schoolers. So that's another great way to connect with me and see all the things I'm doing when you're not watching my videos here on YouTube. But thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and it was so great to collaborate with all of you and hear your experience and share your stories and your advice. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.